Today is February 3rd, 2021, and for once I decided to talk about an issue that mostly concerns a country other than the United States. You can probably tell both by the title and by the picture on screen, I am talking about Myanmar and the events that took place there just in the past few days. Whenever I talk about political events on this channel, they're usually events taking place in the United States. I usually don't talk about political events on this channel that mostly concern countries other than the United States. Like for the first couple months of this channel, I mostly focused on the United States presidential election as well as the House and Senate elections. I've almost never focused on political issues or even just issues in general that primarily affect countries other than the United States. However, this event that took place 2 days ago on Monday, February 1st, 2021, I thought that it was a pretty big deal and I thought it was something that I should talk about. Basically, what happened on Monday was that essentially there was a military takeover of the government in Myanmar. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail now. I'm going to talk about the scenario, but I really don't know that much about the situation. Like I said, I mostly focus on American politics, but I thought that this was a pretty interesting event to talk about because of the some of the parallels between this event and what happened on January 6th in Washington D.C. at the Capitol. So, in this event in Myanmar that took place on Monday, basically the military of Myanmar, they seized power after detaining Aung San Suu Kyi. I am not sure if I pronounced that correctly, and also other democratically elected leaders. They got their power taken away by the military. So the military basically engaged in a coup and forcefully took power from democratically elected leaders. So there were elections in Myanmar in the past fall in like I don't remember the exact date, but it was like October or November of 2020. There were elections that were democratically held, but the military in Myanmar alleged that there was rampant fraud in these elections, and as a result, they thought that the elections were illegitimate. And I thought that this was a pretty interesting parallel between what happened in the Myanmar elections and what happened with the 2020 presidential election. After Joe Biden was declared the winner of the 2020 presidential election, many Republicans on the far right, they alleged that voter fraud took place in the 2020 presidential election, and as a result, Donald Trump, who should have won the election, got his victory stolen away from him. But they filed many lawsuits. The Trump team, the Trump legal team, they filed a lot of lawsuits, but almost none of them passed through. And it turns out that almost all the allegations that they made turned out to be false. So in reality, Joe Biden was the legitimate winner of that election. And in the Myanmar situation, the military of Myanmar alleged that the general elections that took place in Myanmar on November 8th, 2020, that was the exact date, I just looked it up. The military of Myanmar alleged that those elections, the November 8th Myanmar general elections, that they were rampant with fraud, and that the leaders elected in those elections were illegitimate because of that. Aung San Suu Kyi, who was one of the members of the Myanmar government, who was democratically elected but then got detained by the Myanmar military, she, along with many other members of the Myanmar government who got detained by the military, they were all a part of the National League for Democracy. Now, this is one of the dominant political parties in Myanmar, and this political party won the November general elections in Myanmar in a landslide. So, many members of the Myanmar government got detained by the military. So, it wasn't just Aung San Suu Kyi who was detained, but it was many other members of the Myanmar government. But Aung San Suu Kyi, she was the state counselor of Myanmar all the way up until 2 days ago when she got detained by the Myanmar military. Now, the military of this country, they've already announced that they will be replacing some of the leaders of that country. And these new leaders that will be serving in the Myanmar government, they are not going to be democratically elected, obviously. And I think that this whole situation taking place in Myanmar, I think that it's pretty interesting when you compare this situation to what happened last month in January at the Capitol Hill on January 6th. How you had an attempted insurrection back then, around a month ago at this point, but then you actually have a successful insurrection, a successful coup in Myanmar a month later. Now, in the Myanmar situation, you had the military that was completely on board with it. It was Myanmar's military itself that actually engaged in the takeover of the government and detained many of its democratically elected leaders. And last month, on January 6, 2021, at the Capitol, you had a lot of far right Trump supporters. Now, these were die-hard Trump supporters. They were mad that the United States didn't vote for Donald Trump, but instead voted for Joe Biden. They weren't happy with the results of the election, even though the election was democratically held, and the people of the United States decided that they wanted Joe Biden and not Donald Trump. They weren't happy with this result, so they attempted an insurrection. But unlike the Myanmar coup, the coup that was attempted in the United States did not succeed. Now, in the United States and in Myanmar, both of these attempted insurrections were a result of allegations of rampant voter fraud. The military in Myanmar alleged that there was voter fraud in the general November elections, November 2020 elections, that those elections were rampant with fraud. Similarly, Donald Trump himself, but also a lot of Donald Trump supporters, also alleged that in the 2020 presidential election that a lot of voter fraud took place. Thankfully, the attempted coup in the United States did not succeed, but unfortunately, 5 people in total lost their life from that whole situation. But in Myanmar, you had a military takeover of the government that did succeed, and many of the members of the government in Myanmar that were democratically elected now no longer have their position in the government because of the takeover, and now will be replaced with leaders of the government that were not democratically elected. I am personally so glad that I live in the United States and not in Myanmar. What the citizens of Myanmar are going through right now cannot be easy. I've seen some stories from people living in that country right now. It is not an easy time for them. It is all sorts of chaos are going on in that country. So, if by any chance anybody from Myanmar happens to be watching this video, I don't think that's likely, but I'm so sorry for what you're going through right now. Hopefully things get better. That must absolutely suck having your government being taken over forcefully by your own country's military. I'm personally very thankful for the fact that I live in the United States, a country that has institutions strong enough to be able to stop an attempted insurrection.